a stark reminder for Israel on how they are viewed by the international community. On Saturday, the UN General Assembly voted by 98 votes to 17 in favour of a motion that would ask the International Court of Justice for their opinion on Israel's alleged prolonged occupation, settlement and annexation of the Palestinian territory. This resolution argues that the land Israel got from Egypt, Jordan and Syria in the 1967 war was equal to annexation and thus denying Palestinians their right to self-determination. This has angered Israel, who claim that this will ruin any means to negotiate. But will it actually make peace negotiations harder, or is this just an excuse for both sides to avoid a compromise? Is there any substance behind this motion, or is it just an international slap on the wrist? Does this give Israel an insight into who is actually their friend and who is their foe? What will be the effect of the UN vote against Israel?
So let's get to it. What will be the effect of this UN vote against Israel? As always, we begin with a quick fire round of 30 seconds each to lay out your initial stance on the matter, and we'll pick up the conversation right after. Mr. Neuer, please take the lead.
Look, in the Middle East today, we are seeing, I would say in the world, we're seeing two conflicting tracks. The normalization of Israel with new relations with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, and potentially Saudi Arabia. And we're seeing criminalization of Israel led by Palestinians with the support of radical ideologues among Western groups. So this latest decision will feed into the criminalization of Israel. I don't think it's terribly significant. We've seen one of these rulings before, one of these advisory opinions, but it's one more piece.
One more, that's for sure. Mr. Sinijlawi, your take?
Well, there will be no consequences on this vote or any other votes on Israel. Israel is a state that is above the international law, and it is accustomed to be like this. It has impunity from the USA. USA will always veto any resolution that will not suit Israel. So there will be basically zero effect on this vote or any other vote on Israel.
Last but not least, Amir, Oren, your thoughts?
Well, we remember that some 6 years ago, President Obama did not veto a resolution regarding the settlements, but the details here are not important. What's important is that there is some diplomatic move which shows that not only force waged by Hamas or Islamic Jihad can move Israel. So rather than look at it as a negative move, one should look at it benignly or even positively.
And on that note, please feel free to interact from this point onwards. Let's begin with the point that Amir Oren made. Hillel, Neuer, Israel is criticizing Palestinians, and many would suggest rightfully so, for using terror to reach their political objectives. Now they're using diplomatic routes or diplomatic means to pursue their political objectives, but Israel continues to criticize that as well. Is there a right way, quote unquote, to lead to a breakthrough from the Palestinian standpoint?
Well, obviously, I think everyone understands that ultimately the two parties need to negotiate. The only way you'll get peace is negotiation. The UN has been in the business of singling out Israel with an obsessive amount of one-sided resolutions that make no mention of Hamas terrorism. Thousands of rockets fired at Israelis by Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the role of terrorist groups coming out of Jenin. None of this is condemned. There's approximately 15 resolutions every year, entirely one-sided. That is not supporting peace. You know, the United Nations can play a positive role if it encourages both sides to peace, if it holds both sides to account. But having one resolution on Iran and 15 on Israel that make no mention of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the role of Iran, these are regarded in Israel rightly as biased approach, politicized approach, selective approach, which is the very opposite of universality and of universal human rights standards. So I think the UN shoots itself in the foot with this kind of approach. The UN can play a positive role. Here in Geneva, we're going to have a session finally on Iran after never having one in history before at the Human Rights Council. So the UN can play a positive role. It is not doing so in this case.
And in this respect, Amir Sinijlawi, if we're looking at the greater scheme of things, or rather the end goal, the ICJ is essentially asked to decide whether the situation in the West Bank and in Jerusalem is temporary or de facto, as they dub it, annexation. If the goal is to reach a final status on those questions through bilateral negotiations, how does this bid help?
Well, first of all, the term occupation has been the definition of occupation is a temporary. Occupation is temporary. Now, Israel has spent a lot of years occupying the Palestinians. This occupation is becoming indefinite. And Israel likes very much the word to mention the good things about it, but it dislikes the word when they mention the wrongdoings of Israel against Palestinians. There is no opportunity for bilateral negotiations. And I see that it is very legitimate for Palestinians to use all the tools. This is a non-violent tool. It is the UN, and the UN was the same body that give legitimate to Israel. It is because of the UN Resolution 181, Israel was accepted to be a member of the international community.
Legitimate, yes, but my question is, Mr. Sinijlawi, how is it bringing us closer to the negotiation table?
There is no negotiation table. This is nonsense. There was no Netanyahu killed the negotiations 15 years ago. There is nothing going on the ground or between the Palestinians and Israelis that can be called negotiations. Israel is negotiating the Palestinians by tanks. Israel is negotiating the Palestinians by denying more rights, by confiscating their lands, by creating more settlements, more facts on the ground. It's very powerful. It is 1,000 times more powerful than the Palestinians on a military base and also on the economic levels. So we are the weak part of this equation, and there is no negotiation going on. You have seen that even governments like Bennett and Lapid and Gantz refused to resume the negotiations, the political negotiations with the Palestinians. Netanyahu didn't want to talk about it at all. And now we have a more extreme right-wing government that does not want to talk about anything about Palestinians or with Palestinians.
Amir, Oren, timing-wise, is this a statement move in terms of the materializing, or in light rather of the materializing right-wing government here in Jerusalem?
Yes, it is. And, you know, it's funny because when Yasser Arafat died 18 years ago, probably this week, 18 years ago, Netanyahu welcomed Abu Mazen's election to be the next Palestinian leader, saying that it's a very hopeful sign. But he did not carry on. He was a finance minister at the time, but when he came back as prime minister, he tried to shy away from negotiations, as your other guests have pointed out. Now, President Biden and Secretary Blinken made sure that Abu Mazen knows that they are still for a two-state solution. The question is, will Biden, regardless of what the UN or the International Criminal Court or anybody else does, whether Biden will use the remainder of his term to push for a return to negotiations?
Well, that remains to be seen, but let's stay in the frameworks of the current state of affairs. Hillel, Neuer, should Israel cooperate with those bids? It had traditionally boycotted any such Hague debates, etc., and it is likely to do the same now, or rather it declared that it will boycott it this time around as well. Is Israel doing a mistake by boycotting it?
Are you asking me?
By boycotting this advisory opinion?
Yes.
Look, I think Israel has a dilemma. It always has. Abba Eban in 1949 fought very hard for Israel to have a place at the table of nations, and Israel wants to be at the United Nations and should be there using its permanent seat. At times, there are distinct UN mechanisms that are created, or processes that are created, that are kangaroo courts. The example, of course, here in Geneva for the past week was this commission of inquiry headed by Navi Pillay. It's the permanent commission of inquiry that's supposed to look at both sides, but in fact, so far, after 2 reports and 1 week of hearings, is only condemning Israel, making no mention of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Fatah, the terrorists coming out of Jenin, the new groups, no mention. And Navi Pillay, who's the chair of the inquiry, was appointed after she signed a letter to Biden saying that he needs to punish Israel for the May 2021 war, and after she signed a letter to governments saying they need to, quote, sanction apartheid Israel. In other words, she pronounced herself on the very issues that are before her commission of inquiry. This is absolutely unacceptable in any legal tribunal. The United Nations acts in a Kafkaesque Orwellian fashion, and therefore, if you ask whether Israel should legitimize processes or mechanisms that are entirely politicized, then I think Israel has the right to ask that question. And the ICJ, the Chinese judge answers to Beijing. The judge appointed by Moscow answers to Moscow. We are not talking about Aharon Barak or Yitzhak Zamir, people that I had the privilege to work for. You're talking about people that are, so-called judges in many cases, with some exceptions. So the ICJ ruling, the advisory opinion, is the verdict is given. It's a guilty in advance, and the General Assembly has been hijacked by this political process, which has nothing to do with justice.
Sinijlawi, do you think that the involvement of foreign entities, the UN in particular, is being used as an excuse for both sides to simply avoid any compromise?
Well, what other options do the Palestinians have? They don't have the negotiation, and if they have the negotiation table, they don't have the means to have a balance of power that can make this meaningful. There is a
why does Abbas reject every single peace offer? Why does he reject Olmert's peace offer? Where is the Palestinian peace offer?
Well, you don't need a partner in the Palestinians to execute the UN resolutions. You can unilaterally, if Israel has good intention in achieving peace, it can unilaterally withdraw from the occupied territories. You don't need stop using these scenarios that there are no Israeli partner for peace now. There is nobody now in the Israeli government.
Why does Abbas reject?
My friend, nobody now in the Israeli government is willing to sit with any Palestinian or talk with any Palestinian. Nobody now is willing to talk to Abbas or other in the previous government and in the coming government.
When Israel,
gentlemen, we'll have to put a stop right here. We're taking a short break, but we're continuing our debates right after. Do not go anywhere. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Hillel, Neuer, Sinijlawi, and Amir, Oren. Thank you all very much for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, but before we dive back into the conversation, let's take a listen to some of the reactions from Israeli leaders to this Palestinian UN bid.
Israel firmly rejects the proposed Palestinian resolution. This is a one-sided Palestinian move which undermines the basic principles of resolving the conflict and may harm any possibility of a future process. The Palestinians want to replace negotiations with unilateral measures. They are once again using the UN to attack Israel.
The Palestinians' march to the court in The Hague is an own goal that will distance themselves from any political achievement. The UN's intention to allow this will only harm stability in the region and the ability to reach understandings in the future.
So let's begin with another quick fire round of 30 seconds each. It's UN voting pattern giving Israel a sense of who is a friend and who is a foe. Amir, Oren, your thoughts?
Well, as one who does not agree with the government's stand on these issues, I don't believe that whoever criticizes this policy is necessarily a foe of Israel. They could be friends of Israel, and Lapid's reaction was hypocritical. Israel unilaterally helps settling the occupied territories, and the Gantz response was even less sincere because stability is not going to suffer from this move.
Sinijlawi, your thoughts?
Well, Israel does not need to worry about who is a friend and who is not a friend on the international arena. As far as they have the USA that is providing complete immunity, nothing will happen. This is cosmetics. All what we are trying to do as Palestinians through the UN is historic documentation. The UN will not ever be a tool to change the facts on the ground. Israel will continue to enjoy the complete immunity, and it will continue to enjoy this 5 stars occupation.
Okay, Sama, we'll put a stop right here. Hillel, Neuer, your take?
Look, the votes can indicate who's a friend. For example, Italy has a new government. It voted with Israel. But at the same time, you have countries like Singapore that voted against Israel, but which are great friends. But for various UN political pressure reasons, they vote that way. But look, I disagree with Mr. Oren. Even if he opposes Israeli policy, he should not support completely biased mechanisms supported by Syria and Iran that give a free pass to Hamas and Islamic Jihad, that effectively empower terrorist groups, that make absolutely no mention in 15 resolutions of any blame on the other side.
But Mr. Neuer, some Israeli diplomats hailed the voting pattern over this recent vote as a success, with 18 countries opposing, 52 abstaining, and also some absent, 26. But if Israel needs to beg or persuade countries to do so, can it really be viewed as diplomatic strength?
No, there's no begging. Each country is pushing and lobbying. The Palestinians are sending letters and making their appeals. Israel does its own. And it is a record of influence of a certain kind. Again, it's limited. I mentioned you have countries who voted against Israel who have excellent bilateral relations. I would say whenever you get a country that is willing to buck the trend and to vote no, abstain, or be absent, that indicates strength for Israel, because Israel is always the unpopular one at the United Nations. It's been that way since the Soviet Union rammed through the automatic majority since the 1970s. So it is true that getting under 100 votes for the anti-Israel narrative is one of the lowest numbers they've ever gotten. So I think the rejectionist stance of the Palestinians, which is anti-peace, which is against negotiations, got a hit. And going the unilateral route was not very successful if you look at the outcome of the vote.
Summer, your thoughts? Is the Palestinian cause becoming a non-issue in the global agenda, as Mr. Neuer is suggesting?
Well, I think this voting on Saturday was a huge diplomatic failure for the Palestinian diplomacy. Seeing countries like Spain, Sweden, and Finland abstaining such a resolution, or seeing Italy voting against is a disaster. And it shows that how much Abbas and his authority are completely absent on a political level. I know that for each cases there has been a reason. Most of the country that abstained, they abstained because the Palestinians did not coordinate this resolution with them, and introducing new wording in this classical resolution that addresses the International Court of Justice took them by surprise, and they couldn't react. Some countries like Denmark, for example, they have a government that is handling it's a temporary government, and they couldn't simply decide. The bureaucrats in their team in the UN simply couldn't decide on the new wording, and they abstained. The same happened to Spain, Sweden, and Finland. Italy is a different case. Italy, the new prime minister
many new
was
administrations, Sweden, Denmark, Italy, all new administrations.
India abstained. I have to note India abstained, which is huge. That's very significant. India normally votes with the Palestinians, even if they have great bilateral relations. Even Modi, who was close with Netanyahu, typically voted against Israel. The abstention is a major failure for Abbas.
It is a major failure. And, for us as a Palestinian people, we are very much disappointed to see that the whole world is becoming very much not very sensitive to the Israeli crimes against Palestinians. Now the Israeli army and the settlers are hunting Palestinians in the street for sport and fun. There is no consequences. If you kill 1 or 10 or 15 Palestinians a day, nobody simply cares. There has never been a single case where a soldier has been taken to court and been convicted in killing a Palestinians without a reason. They can open fire, they can kill Palestinians, they can confiscate land, they can build settlements, and the whole world is accustomed to this, and they just let it go. This is very disappointing for us as Palestinians. And here I ask the questions: if we are not, if violence is not an option, and then the UN is not an option, and the ICJ is not an option, what should the Palestinians do? On a daily basis, we are denied rights, we are killed, our land is confiscated, we don't have freedoms, we are under pressure. What should the Palestinians do? Where should we go under all these circumstances? So
stop inciting terrorism. Stop inciting terrorism. Stop paying for terrorism. The Fatah is praising terrorism coming out of Jenin. Israelis have been killed in Tel Aviv. Israeli civilians are killed in Tel Aviv and Iraq.
The most organized, the most well-equipped terrorism organization is the IDF. Your soldiers are committing terrorism every day. Your settlers, the hilltop youth are committing terrorism.
Those are Amir soldiers, not mine. I'm Canadian. I'm sorry.
The number of terrorist actions committed by settlers against Palestinians is times and times more than the actions taken by Palestinians against Israelis.
Well, if I may, Ellie, let me respond by an irresistible response and a serious one. First, when Spain abstains, it's easy to explain, as a song once almost said. And on a serious note, all Israeli governments always want peace. They just don't want to pay the price of peace. And boycotting a UN or any other international body is not a good move. Even the Soviets found about it in the Korean War. Better for Israel to cooperate than put across in the strongest word possible its opposition, but also progress towards peace.